How's it going, guys? We're going to find out how the Dutch shaped Indonesia. That's right. So, right here we have it. The original channel is called The Present Past. Never heard of this channel. I'm going to hit like because it's probably going to be a good video. If I thoroughly enjoyed it at the end, I'm going to hit subscribe, and I suggest you guys do too. The links to the original video will be in that description section down there like it usually is. So we're going to find out how the Dutch shaped Indonesia. I found this one in my Discord video suggestions list. So if you got any good videos, toss them in there. You want me to see them? Can't do them all, but I skim through them and I pick out the good ones, all right? So let's find out.
This is Indonesia, a fascinating country you never heard of. And it wouldn't have existed without the Dutch. Indonesia is huge. It's the fourth biggest in population, the biggest Muslim country in the world. The country has a great variety of cultures, religions, and people in their borders. But these borders have not been shaped by Indonesian peoples. They
It looks like a lot of them were shaped by the ocean.
are a direct legacy of their colonial past, shaped by Dutchmen in their greedy quest for wealth. What is weird is that these borders were only finished a few decades before Indonesia won its independence.
You know, Indonesia is just so crazy. Like, there's got to be some cultural differences there because there's just so many different islands and isolated spots that are isolated from the other parts of the country. Man, I bet it's an interesting country.
And these colonial borders and the resources within them give Indonesia trouble to this day. So how did these borders come into being? How do they influence the present? How did we get here?
Good question. How did they get there? Yeah, I think this is going to be a good channel.
I'm in the Indische buurt in Amsterdam. This is a place where the streets are named after possessions the Dutch had in the East Indies.
Okay.
This part of the city was built in the 1900s, and it sort of coincides with the end of the Dutch imperial project in Indonesia. With it, the city seems to show that all these far-flung places are actually part of one grand unified theme. The only problem with that is that it's a total construct. It is a construct that we call Indonesia. This name, meaning Indian island, was used in the 1800s by English researchers. The Dutch preferred to call it the Netherlands East Indies.
Okay, so the East India Trading Company, Dutch East India Trading Company. So is this off the coast of India then? Because it says the Indian Islands.
India, or just the East. A construct that was only finished after a colonial project of subjugation, blood, and extraction that lasted 350 years.
So that guy sounds Dutch himself. I'm going to hit subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and do that now. Yeah, he sounds Dutch, actually.
Of course, the history of the region doesn't start when the Europeans arrive. Indonesia has been at the crossroads of international trade for millennia. Take this 700-year-old batik. Batik is a decorative technique that originates in Java, but the cloth they made it with came all the way from India. Trade brought religion, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam.
Okay, so it is relatively close to the coast of India, but I don't know exactly what this is. Is this part of India too? I thought India just kind of like came up here and stopped in there. Is this part of India too? I don't know.
In honor of these religions, great shrines were built. But this was in no means a unified territory. Across the 70,000 or so islands that make up modern Indonesia, there was a huge
Did they just say, he just said 70,000 islands? Holy crap.
unified territory. Across the 70,000 or so islands that make up modern Indonesia, there was a huge number of kingdoms and sultanates. The Hindu-Buddhist Majapahit Empire from the 1300s looks the most like modern-day Indonesia. It had a strong core, and kingdoms that were aligned with it. But it was already long gone when the Europeans arrived. They come for the
Leave it to the Europeans to screw it up for everybody, guys.
but it was already long gone when the Europeans arrived.
Long gone.
They come for these spices that can be found in the Moluccas. First the Portuguese and then the Dutch arrive. In the end, the Dutch conquer a huge part of the archipelago. They didn't really set out to conquer all this land. They just wanted spice at first. But an unexpected change made them slowly embrace a way bigger imperialistic goal. This imperialistic project went in 5 phases.
All right, we got chapters. Monopoly.
In the first, the Dutch try very hard to gain a monopoly on the spice trade, because that's what makes the most money. They do this with a private company, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. Along the way, they actually
I knew it. Dutch East India Trading Company, guys.
invented stocks and the stock market. But they're there for spices like cinnamon, cloves, pepper and nutmeg.
Hey, I got those in my cabinet.
To cook and for medicine. How fortunate that you can't find nutmeg anywhere in the world but here. I have to tell you a bit about what an
Are you serious? You can't find nutmeg anywhere but there? That's crazy. I got nutmeg in my cabinet. It came from East Indies, Indonesia.
That you can't find nutmeg anywhere in the world but here.
That's
I have
cool.
to tell you a bit about what an insane company this VOC was, what they could do. Because they could enter into diplomatic relations, they could declare war, they could invade lands.
They could pop up in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
Keep a standing army. Imagine Apple one day just deciding to invade China.
But there is one more thing.
The Dutch start with trade though. They made a contract with the Bandanese, where the nutmeg grows. But these people, they understood market capitalism. So they also traded with the English. And that really pisses the Dutch off, big time.
Uh-oh.
Remember, they're here for monopoly. They can't have people trading with everyone.
No, that would screw up the whole business, right, guys?
The governor, Jan Pieterszoon Koen, hires Japanese samurai to butcher village elders. They depopulate the complete islands. Thousands die in this genocide.
Jeez, I did not expect that. Wow, okay.
At home, not everyone was pleased. The predecessor of Koen said, "In an empty sea, on empty lands, with dead people, you can't make a profit." But that's not what Koen thought. Next to subjugating complete islands, the Dutch also strike deals with local kings and sultans. They can keep their throne, as long as they serve the Dutch. And in the end, the Dutch make it. They have a monopoly on the spice trade.
Well, yeah, I mean, he who has the bigger weapons is probably going to be in charge, right? That's just how it's been.
Finally. And then, well, tastes change. Suddenly, these heavy stews of medieval times that needed a lot of spices are not so popular anymore. They are replaced by French cuisine, truffles, oysters, crab. Has all the bloodshed been for nothing?
I kind of would rather have the spices and the cardamoms and the cloves and all that stuff. Like, you make those speculoos cookies with them. That's delicious, by the way.
What do the Dutch do with this tropical destination?
Plantations? Okay.
Well, the people in the 1700s do want sugar, tobacco, cacao, tea, coffee.
Wait a minute. Does this coincide with the end of the 80 Years' War? Like the end of the Dutch Golden Age? Because the plantation era, chapter 2 here says 1700s or 1700 to like 17 something else, right? That's right after the Dutch Golden Age, because that was at the end of the 1600s, I believe. So is this part of the reason why the Dutch Golden Age fell? Because France came in with their fancy crepes and stuff?
But compared to spices, these crops have one problem. They are built on plantations that need land, a lot of land. So suddenly the Dutch need to expand their base of operations. They start more wars to claim land and expand their colonial possession. Do you have any idea why a cup of coffee is sometimes called a cup of Java? Well, the Dutch, they introduced coffee on this island. For some time, they become the biggest exporters of coffee, of the whole world. Chinese planters produce sugar, tobacco is planted. The Dutch, they had started with a few outposts, but are now growing into a bigger colonial state. And it works, they're making money again. But the frenzy, it doesn't last. It turns out that you can make sugar and coffee in other places. They don't have a monopoly, and the cost of maintaining a huge empire is just too high. In 1799, the VOC goes bankrupt. And at the same time, the Netherlands are overrun by Napoleon. Is this the end of the Dutch colonial project in the Indies?
More French guy. Napoleon was French, right? So they came in with their crepes and their French truffles or whatever you called it, right? And the oysters. And then Napoleon comes in. So the French screwed up the Dutch. Ooh, chapter 3. Birth of the Kneel.
Well, not really. Occupation of the Indies continues. First a brief stint under French and then English rule. Later, when Napoleon is defeated, the Dutch get their colony back. And they get a present. While they were away, a governor started this whole new thing.
A present. Presents are nice.
A colonial army with recruits drawn from all over the archipelago. It is called the KNIL. A lot of recruits sign up from the Moluccas because that spice trade that wasn't so lucrative anymore, they needed a job. And the Dutch, they had some ideas how to use this new army.
Okay. Ooh, chapter 4 right here. Culture still.
Because this is really a time the Dutch are occupying even more land in their archipelago. Why so? Well, the Napoleonic conquest ravaged the Netherlands. The new Dutch king, he needs a source of income. And where does he look? The Dutch Indies, of course. He wants money. He starts to lease land to farmers to tax them. And he also works with the local kings. But that doesn't end well. The kings exploit their farmers. So much that even the Dutch think it's going too far. So they end this arrangement.
I mean, the Dutch, the Dutch thought some other stuff was going too far one time and they ate their own prime minister. Don't mess with the Dutch.
And that really pisses off the kings. So you have this prince, Diponegoro, who starts a huge war on Java. He wages this guerrilla war for 5 years and the Dutch retaliate. 200,000 people die, mostly of starvation. It's one of the last times that local elites try to resist Dutch advances, but they are crushed in the end. And just when the situation seems to be under control in Indonesia, the Belgians secede from the northern Netherlands. They want to be an independent country. Like whatever, do what you want, we don't need you. But
He is Dutch. He's like, do what you want. We don't need you. He spoke like coming from a personal place. Let me know. Do you guys think he's Dutch too? I have no clue. I didn't check out his channel. I didn't hit the About Me section or whatever it is on the channel to see where the channel's made. Just going by the accent.
now the Dutch king needs even more money to finance a costly war. Where should all this money be coming from? Well, this king got a brilliant idea. What if we tax the local population? They shouldn't give money, but culture goods. Coffee, cacao, rubber. They may not have money, but they can farm.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
So suddenly the whole population of Java, the farmers, had to use 1/5 of their plots to make these culture goods. If you couldn't or didn't have a farm, you had to work 66 days for years in a government plantation. This was called the cultuurstelsel. And for the Dutch, the cultuurstelsel becomes a huge success. Up to half of the total revenue for the Netherlands in the 1850s comes from the cultuurstelsel. Half. But Dutch and local rulers squeeze the local population and ask more and more of the farmers. These farmers can't even make enough rice, which leads to famines. And the system leads to an outcry by a colonial employee, Multatuli. He writes this book, Max Havelaar, that describes the atrocities in the colony. It really resonates in the Netherlands with all the injustice done to the locals and slowly means an end to the government-led cultuurstelsel. But is this the end of the exploitation? No.
Nope. Imperialism, chapter
Dutch
5.
private corporations jump in the hole left by the cultuurstelsel. They build plantations that need more and more land. And the Dutch are ready to get it. Between 1816 and 1914, the KNIL launches some 200 military expeditions. Some are small and some are endless. Over half the final colony is conquered in this period. And this is really also what's happening in the rest of the world. In 1800, European powers only occupied about 30% of the world. In 1914, 84%. Changes in the world have repercussions in the colony. When the Suez Channel is opened in 1869, the far edges of this region suddenly become super important. Ships that used to arrive from the southwest suddenly start arriving through the Strait of Malacca, next to the Sultanate of Aceh. Aceh is a strong, independent state with a strict interpretation of Islam, and they want to keep it that way. They fiercely resist the Dutch advances. It takes 40 years of war and the lives of 100,000 people to pacify this stretch of land. When General von Heuts, one of the Dutch heroes of this war, dies, he gets a state funeral that's only reserved for royals. Yeah, he really was a big shot. But there we have it. Indonesia was finally completed. 300 years after their first arrival, the quest of the Dutch started with spices, transformed in an insane imperial project.
And What exactly would Indonesia look like without the Dutch interference? Like, would they still be like just like jungle people, or like no fan? That's I don't know if they were jungle people. They lived in the jungle, right? So I guess they were. But like, you know what I mean? Like, would they still be like tribes people, like simpletons, or would they have progressed? Like, did it actually help them in the long run? Right? Is that the big question here? I think I'm trying to ask. Because without the colonialism and this and that, maybe they would have stayed more tribesmen status, if that makes sense.
A nation of 5 million people lorded over 40 million Indonesians. The colony was the biggest producer of sugarcane. They built coffee, tea, tobacco, rubber. They mined gold, extracted oil, all supported by cheap and plentiful labor from the colonies in China.
You're just stripping them dry there.
Breaking their back for the Dutch. And slowly the idea started to take hold that the Dutch maybe have some responsibility for all these peoples. They imprinted the idea that all these different people actually were one, all under Dutch rule. This didn't really have the effect the Dutch anticipated though, because it's in these schools that ideas of independence begin to brew. Later, revolution leaders such as Hatta, Charir and Sukarno get educated by the Dutch. They develop this idea of unifying all these different peoples in one state, based on the territory of the colony. The fight for independence and the creation of a nation-state from the rubble of this colonial empire is far from easy.
Okay, so it was separate things, right? So then they decided to bring it all together as one whole unit called Indonesia, like as a whole, right? So before that, it was separated. Each island, each thing was its own little separate kind of thing. Is that? Maybe I'm getting it wrong, but I think that's where they're going at.
The path to a modern Indonesia leads past insurrections, a fight with the former colonizer, and enduring internal insecurity. We will cover this path in part 2 of this series.
Ooh. Part 2, guys. Part 2. So, yeah, that's something I'm going to be looking forward to. Let me see here. When was this video made? This was made a year ago, so there should be a part 2. If I can't find it, that'll suck. If I can find it, you'll be able to watch it. So make sure you hit that notification bell after you hit like and subscribe. So go down there and do that. Even if you subscribe, most of the time, it's not going to recommend the stuff. It's just YouTube's weird like that. So if you want to make sure you don't miss out on these videos or part 2 of this one, hit that notification bell. You guys have a super fun, awesome day. I will catch you in the next one. Take care.